This is Ian Williams with the Foreign Press Association in New York, and we're having sorry for the short notice on this one, but we'd had a live in-person briefing at our FPA meetup in New York at the Fitzpatrick Hotel with Craig Unger the other day, and it was we couldn't podcast from there, live cast from there, so we're doing it today for posterity and for the ones who missed, and because the subject is extremely important and Craig's book is extremely important, both for the nature of politics in the US and also for the nature of journalism. Because if you look at his book, Den of Spies, and you might remember that a couple of years ago we featured him with another book, Kompromat, which was about how the KGB had apparently seemed to have met, and it was a KGB agent who told us. So, so far as anyone has credibility, that would do it. That Donald Trump was essentially a Russian asset. There's a difference between a Russian asset and an asset and an agent. An asset is someone who does favors for you, whereas an agent who obeys orders. Good luck anyone getting Donald Trump to obey orders. Um, you have to dangle a check first, I think. Sorry, I'm being a trifle partisan and risking our 501c3 status, people tell me. But looking at the events of the last few days, the last few weeks, you really begin to wonder. And I've asked Craig to diverge a bit. His book is about Reagan, Carter, and the secret history of the treason that stole the White House, which was namely about how the Republican operatives, or actually pro-Bush operatives and pro-Reagan operatives, manipulated foreign affairs. And, sadly, people died for this. They declared wars and prolonged conflicts purely and simply to secure the election. And we know this happens on all sides. We saw the shenanigans about the Vietnam War and how hostilities were turned on and off, and peace was made, and different parties in the negotiations were put on ice or brought in the warmth. So it's a sort of ongoing trait throughout American politics. But most recently, of course, in this case, it was about Iran. And we had the improbable sort of mix-up of the enemies list, where weapons were being sent from Israel to Iran and return and the money for it was going to Nicaragua to finance a avowed terrorist group against the then Sandinista government. Of course, the Sandinista government has proven to be almost as bad as Reagan said it was going to be, but that's another story. He didn't know then. And we have to put this as down on a learning curve. Craig is going to go into this and he's going to tell us, because I think the bit that hit me about his book, reading it as a writer and a journalist and a researcher, is just how many obstacles were put in the way. And it seemed that the establishment in various kinds, first of all, we had the people who couldn't believe that American politicians would do a thing like this. It was unthinkable. It reminded me of the famous scene in Casablanca. Gambling is going on here. Shocked, shocked, shocked. Except a lot of the mainstream media actually were shocked, and wouldn't believe what was apparent. So Craig spent those many years trying to make it apparent, to try to make it there. And every time he came up with evidence, there was stonewalling. And I think, there's a sort of intimate connection between presidential archives and restrooms, because he found the key evidence that clinched and proved what everything he'd said for many years was in the ladies' restroom in the Rayburn building, I think it was. So, Craig, can you take us through the story and try to integrate it into today and what journalists should be looking out for in terms of obfuscation? Like, are they terrorists in El Salvador, and should they be there anyway? And all of the other chaff that's in the air to distract the radar. So
right. Well,
over to you, Craig.
Well, in a lot of ways, I think this is what happened in 1980 is a precursor of what we're going through now. And one of the big differences is what happened then was really unseen. It was very weird actually, because it both happened sort of in plain sight, and yet no one could see it. It was like a master illusionist. When Ronald Reagan was inaugurated on January 20th, 1981, Jimmy Carter had negotiated for the release of the hostages. They were supposed to be released early that day, but while he was still president, he was waiting for them to be released. And then suddenly Reagan was at the podium and took the oath of office, and they hadn't been delivered yet. But sure enough, about 5 minutes later, they all took off. The planes left Iran airspace and the hostages started flying home. Um, the situation, I mean, if you think about it, Reagan could not possibly have negotiated while he was president. So something must have been going on behind the scenes. The Onion, the satirical magazine, had a book looking back on the 20th century, and for that date, they had a mock New York Times headline: Ronald Reagan inaugurated as president, urges America not to put two and two together. I mean, so it seemed obvious on its face, but proving it became exceedingly difficult. And I started out in 1991. George H.W. Bush was president. He was going to be running for reelection. We knew that. So he was an integral part of this. And we were trying to prove whether or not it had happened. And you could put together a strong circumstantial case, but there was still a lot of questions unanswered. I did that story for Esquire, and immediately after, Newsweek hired me and took me on, presumably to do the investigation. But while I was there, and this is really one of the most shocking things I've ever been through as a journalist, you could see the team did a 180. What was started to be out as a serious investigation, I thought, became a mission to just shut the story down. And Newsweek wrote 3 weeks in a row, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen. And what we had begun to accumulate evidence that the Republicans had a covert operation going, and they made a secret deal with Iran during the election while they were not in power. They had no authority to intervene in American foreign policy, and they started shipping weapons to the new Iranian Islamic government, Republic of Iran, in return for which they got Iran to not release the hostages, to prolong the incarceration of 52 American hostages, because if they'd come home during Carter's presidency, he might have won again. He probably would have beaten Reagan.
And relating that to today, I mean, part of it is this idea. Your colleagues in Newsweek, did they have any explanation? Did they believe all of this, or are they just in the famous exculpatory phrase at Nuremberg, obeying orders?
Well, they would criticize the sources, and when you do this kind of reporting, you're relying on arms dealers and spies are professional arms dealers and professional liars, and so are arms dealers in a way. So you're dealing with people who can be easily discredited, and that happened a lot to my reporting. My the way I thought about it was, you hear them out and you try to corroborate or refute it, and you say, if you can't corroborate it, you say so. And that's the way I played it. I think it's worth noting, at the time I was doing all this reporting, this is back in 91, John Gotti was being tried as well, the great Italian mobster, and there was only one witness against him, really. Sal Gravano, Sammy the Bull Gravano, who had been convicted himself of something like 17 murders. So talk about being able to impeach a source. His character was easy enough to impugn, yet his what he said could was corroborated enough that John Gotti was convicted, and that's sort of the dilemma I was faced with as a reporter.
In fact, since it's just coming up to Easter, you don't have to be too theological to remember that Pontius Pilate is memorable for saying, "What is truth?" when he went along with the crucifixion, according to the sources. So, what is truth is a big question here, and it's quite clear that truth doesn't mean anything. Truth is an expediency for many
Well,
politicians
I
in
mean,
all colors.
the cliche is history is written by the victors. Sometimes it's written by the people who live the longest. If that makes them the victors, well, whatever. But you're absolutely right. And what you see, I mean, what I went through in writing my book, Den of Spies, it was a battle for the truth. I mean, what really happened? And Newsweek said again and again that it didn't happen. I had enough information that I was absolutely certain it happened, but I couldn't. Some of that was on background, and I couldn't really use it. And by this time, the story had been largely discredited, so it was an uphill battle. I was being sued by Bud McFarlane, so I had that was a huge distraction. And basically, I was unemployed, so it was not easy to get the story out.
That's a part of the price of doing. It shouldn't be the part price, but in your case, didn't you have to sell your home to pay the legal costs?
Well, I ended up being, New York was too expensive in the end, so I did with all these costs. So I did leave and went to Boston, where I was editor of Boston Magazine for 5 years, and then came back here.
I mean, it is very difficult to swim against the tide, and the tide flows because I think part of the story here is this what you might call court. How is it? It's in-house reporting. I mean, we've seen that with the White House Correspondents Association at the moment, where
Right. Well, there's access journalism is a phrase I use a lot, and it means access. I think people are not reporters may not know this, but your sources are more important than your employer often. I mean, if your source is a guy like Henry Kissinger, you can have a career, right? Dining out with him all the time. You'll get front page scoops. Your stock will rise at whatever publication or uh, broadcast outlet you're with enormously. But what that means is you pay a price for it if you're really seeking the truth, because you're sort of at their mercy. You cannot piss them off. They are your that access is coin of the realm. So I don't really play that game, and I mean, I do use sources, of course, but they're often people who I think are knowledgeable who are not that famous. If you followed the last impeachment, the January 6 hearings, Cassidy Hutchinson was someone who wasn't really famous. He was not a household name at all, but she was in the room and had access to information. There's sources like that that you try to get.
but then, of course, they are subject of redoubled hatred from a spiteful administration because they're felt to have betrayed confidences afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. Now there will be we're seeing the start of a new kind of McCarthyism, and I think it's going to be brutal. And Trump is moving very, very fast, and I think that I think the Democrats might have a good chance of winning the midterms, but that's a long time from
That's
now.
assuming that midterms are allowed, and
Yeah, there's a
as
lot
we
going to happen before then, and it's hard to fight back, but you know.
Joseph Stalin, as I said on Monday night, expressed it best. He said the elections are not won by who votes, but by who counts the votes. And that is
Right,
becoming a
right.
very real worry at the moment, which is it's I've never met so many journalists who our members are actually scared, some of them,
Oh,
about the
absolutely.
consequences. Will they be allowed back in the country? I mean,
Exactly. No, absolutely. It's a question I think about. You know, it's also the more uh, successful you are at fighting against them, the greater risks you you pose to yourself. You know, the higher you will be on their hit list.
I mean, by the way, I've got no coming from outside, I've got no particular sort of tribal loyalties to Republicans or Democrats per se. And Madeleine Albright was trying to find out what my visa status was when I used to write for The Nation and the New York Observer, to see whether I was entitled to write for American publications. So it's not an exclusive Republican vindictiveness, but there's this element in the politics of which is not so much ideological, which as McCarthy, but there is a sort of spiteful personal vindictiveness. This person said rude things about me, not that he or she disagrees with me, but this person was rude to me. Therefore, I'm going to get him, and I'm going to use the full apparatus of the administration to do it. So you can
Right.
almost see why people don't want to publish the unthinkable and say that the president of the US was conniving with the our number one hate figure at the time, Iran, and conniving with their number one hate country, Israel, to deliver arms to terrorists in defiance of the Senate.
Right.
That
I
sounds a
mean,
bit the
it's
defiance.
really another reason I think the story didn't get out, it was suppressed, was Israel's role. And basically, you see Israel as a very, very active and very, very willing participant in a covert operation that sabotages an American presidential election. Well, they're supposed to be our goddamn allies. They can't do that. That's violating our sovereignty. That is cause for war. How the hell do they get by with that?
Well, surely you wouldn't be accusing Netanyahu of blowing hot and cold over Gaza in relation
No,
to.
but this was long before Netanyahu. This
I
was
know, I know. I'm just extrapolating, because it's quite clear that the electoral calculations are there in foreign policy. Um, it's but it's the lack of ideology that disturbs me. I can take that. You disagree with me, and we'll argue and we'll punch it out. But the idea that I might at some point have not noticed you in a gathering and you're going to make me get
right. This
payback.
is gangster ism is the ideology. It's like the Russian mafia, the kleptocracy that Putin sort of erected with his oligarchs. Um, and Trump is, I think, really trying to set that up here with Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and so forth as his oligarchs.
Well, look, can we move on from the uh, Iran-Israel nexus and consider that with your book, American Kompromat? And so I'm presuming that you have not been disabused of the idea that Trump is paying back debts to people in Moscow.
You know, Trump is a Russian asset, you know, I'm sort of being a bit of a repeating that again and again and again. I did two books that sort of came to that conclusion. Um, you know, American Kompromat and House of Trump, House of Putin. I'm now doing on Substack sort of a Trump Russia timeline in which I'm doing step by step by step by step how it happened. And I think it's important to understand this because this one sentence I think is sort of historic. Donald Trump, President of the United States, is a Russian asset. And what it speaks to, I think, is depending upon your point of view, either one of the most astounding spy stories and successful covert operations over 40 years that ended up hitting a home run from the Russian point of view, or the most egregious, grotesque, catastrophic failure in American breach of security in the American intelligence. I mean, where's the FBI? Where was the CIA? How could this possibly have happened? And what's happening now, I think we're seeing it unravel in real time at the pace of a hurricane. Um, and he's flooding the zone every which way but loose. But it's not good.
Well, we have some singular coincidence, almost inexplicable. The Everyone except the most devoted MAGA, and regardless of what your views on Russia or Ukraine was, were shocked by that performance and sort of public pillorying in the White House of President Zelensky. That's not the way you treat a foreign head of state,
Not the
even an
way you treat a
enemy.
dog. I mean, it was horrible. It was really disgraceful. I mean, it isn't a strong enough word, you know. Um, but it showed where he's, I would love to be wrong, but he is caving to Moscow and Ukraine, no matter what happens, how it plays out in the next 6 months, I don't know. But
Do you
there's
think, I mean, do you think the Russians were sold a pup? They should have bought a clever agent who would disguise his moves. He could have sabotaged the Ukrainian war effort without prancing on the world stage
well,
and
they
dancing
they
on Zelensky's grave.
they did, and Manafort helped to elect him in was it 2004? I mean, and um, they do enormous their ability to erode democratic institutions from the inside is extraordinary, and we see it happening now.
Well, it's there's also the Orwellian aspect, because if they say it, well, that's Alice in Wonderland country, isn't it? If they say it three times, it must be true. So we have, in your case, the repetition that the parties could not have met in Paris, even though you had clear evidence that they did. And now you have a similar determination that, well, we sent Abrega to El Salvador as a terrorist, so he must be a terrorist.
Right,
QED. I mean, and the refusal to back down on this. In a sense, you almost have to admire them. You know, Lesser Soul would have cut the losses and moved on to the next battle, but they are not giving an inch, a centimeter on this.
right. No, it's just extraordinary. I mean, and I think it is instructive to try to compare the difference between what was going on in 1980 and now. And in 1980, it was a real spy story. It's like I mean, I described Bill Casey as a cross between James Bond and Mr. Magoo, and he was very slovenly. His table manners were horrible. He mumbled, but he was dazzlingly brilliant and could put together uh, and he assembled a secret intelligence network with arms dealers and spies and operatives and cutouts and the whole thing while he was running a presidential campaign, a winning one at that. Um, but it was all undercover and no one understood what was going on until, I mean, I think I put it together as well as anyone 33 years later. Today, Trump is doing everything out in the open. I mean, it's so out in the open, but a lot of it is just distractions. And I'm sure um, there's a lot more serious stuff that's going on that's very disturbing. I mean, I'm worried about their collection of data and it becoming a surveillance state with Elon Musk having access to everyone's social security number and all that. There's just an extraordinary amount of data they could have that they will be putting to partisan uses or they'll be able to manipulate in one way or another.
Well, like I say, in partisan uses, I could almost understand, but it is very much down to spite and vindictiveness. You know, part of Zelensky's problem was he didn't deliver young Biden the evidence that was wanted.
Right, right. Well, I
And
also think of the cruelty as part of their brand. And I love those pictures of, did you see Kristi Noem standing in front of all the caged immigrants? I mean, it was just sort of disgusting. It was like it was very, like she's a prison warden overseeing these hardened
well,
criminals.
I saw a telling photo combination of the prison guard in Abu Ghraib giving thumbs up
Exactly.
next
It does
to
evoke that.
an
And
American
and this is the woman
congressman.
who blew her dog's head off, you know.
Well, I've got mixed feelings about dogs, but I'm not a great pet lover. But it does bespeak a certain lack of humanity, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. No, I mean, you know, the other thing, the new press secretary, I just wince every time I see her. Caroline, uh, is it, I'm sorry, is it
But
Caroline Levitt?
she's easily forgettable as a person because it's I mean, once again, Orwell had a word for it, a duck speaker who could carry on reciting lies regardless with a straight face and not a conviction. And I'm sure half the secret is she believes the lies she's telling. And
Right.
Americans in general, and the world in general, but Americans in particular, have a great regard for sincerity. If someone sincerely believes what they're saying and doing, then we cut a lot of slack for them. And in her case, I believe she's a true believer. If Donald Trump tells her in the morning, or Elon Musk tells her in the morning this is so, then she'll believe it and she'll recite it with complete
Right.
conviction. And it goes unchallenged. All of those people in the White House Correspondents Association sit through lie after lie after lie. And they don't challenge them enough because it would be indecorous if they actually said, "Well, what's your evidence for this guy being a terrorist?
Right.
What's the
Right.
police
No,
records? How
right.
did he get there? Why you define the Supreme Court?" And they don't ask those questions. It's at times like this I almost long for back home when in the old days at least we had interviewers
In
who
the old,
regarded as rude because they
yeah,
they persisted in asking questions when they didn't get answers.
right. Well, in the old days, one is I think Americans really shared the same set of facts, and that's just not at all the case any longer. I mean, they're like people living in a different factual reality. It's also so atomized that I think the press doesn't have the clout it once did. When I started out, there were stories like Watergate or the My Lai massacre, the Pentagon Papers, in which just one or two journalists could really do something historic and it would take control of the national conversation and history would unfold as it did in all those instances. Now, I mean, it seems the president's a rapist, so what, 36 felonies, nothing, everything washes off. He's a Russian asset, no one really cares. Uh, and it's quite extraordinary, and I don't know exactly how to change that.
Look, we have. Are there any of you out there who would like to contribute to this? If you put your hand up, I'm sure Samantha can patch you in because there are big journalistic issues, and maybe we don't want to. I'm quite happy to talk about the politics of it because I'm horrified and disgusted, and it is a threat to our members and our profession, let
Oh,
alone the world.
absolutely. It's
Anybody out there, or are you all scared of deportation? And several of our members have been to me and saying that, yes, we are concerned, and when we're allowed to say this, and they're scrubbing their social media, and well, I'm laid back on this one. I told them, don't bother scrubbing your social media because if they want to find it, it'll be there. It'll be, the backup web will have it, and Elon
right,
Musk will
right.
get it. So,
I think we've lost that battle already. And I think it is quite scary. I mean, I also think when Musk took over Twitter, it was like a $44 billion campaign contribution to Trump. And I had built up something of a following on Twitter. And when I did a reasonably clever tweet, I could reach roughly 1 million people, 800,000, 1 million people. Now I'm lucky to reach 1,000 or 2,000. I mean, and he's taken it over and we call it shadow banning. He is sort of muting the reach and limiting the reach of people who may have tweeted something critical of Trump.
well, I moved to Blue Sky, which is more open now, but it doesn't have the reach. So, I think Blue Sky to get 800,000 hits would be fairly amazing.
Right. No, right. Now, will you see the advent of, also of Substack, which is where I am now, and starting to build an audience?
Well, in a sense, that's you couldn't start your own newspaper in the days of media magnets and when it was now you can get past Rupert Murdoch. But on the other hand, it's some serious competition. It's like sort of playing a penny whistle against a tuba. In fact, far worse than that. Um, so it's like using a firecracker against 100 megatons if you dare to go against the
Right. Well,
unabashed one-sided stuff that comes out.
right. I think I think one of our great problems today has been a failure to regulate uh, social media in Silicon Valley. And I mean, you could see what Musk was doing was that he was tweaking all the algorithms, and it changed the national conversation enormously. And Twitter was a good place to view what was happening, but it took a very, very sharp rightward twist when he took it over.
Well, once again, we come back to Orwell, where, war is peace, love is hate, because what's happening now, it's being done in the name of freedom of information. You can't let government regulate
Right. Well, with
Twitter and
state,
Facebook
it's the freedom to print, to publish Russian propaganda and various right wing
and to
ideas.
drown out others. I mean, it
Yeah,
really
yeah.
is. And also, I mean, the fact that they're pursuing Columbia and Harvard and others under the pretense of defending civil liberties and equality.
No, everything it is truly
Mm.
Orwellian, and uh, I'm shocked that it's gotten this far. Uh,
Well, people on the left have disarmed themselves because they went along with this. I mean, I it's irrelevant to our conversation today, but I've never been against tariffs as such. I mean, I've written columns for 30 years pointing out the judicious use of tariffs is what allowed China and North Korea, and in fact, originally the United States, to develop and build. Um, so it's not tariffs as such, it's the maladministration of them and the vindictiveness and how they're applied.
but I think he's using them as a weapon and a shakedown scheme. He can now go to Tim Cook or people who run trillion-dollar companies and say, I can kill you. I can kill you by raising tariffs. Let's make a deal. And I think he's doing that with all of them. I mean, it's a huge power play for him.
Well, mentioning The Godfather again, making people offers that they can't refuse is
Precisely, precisely.
is part of the business.
And he can do that with countries as well.
Well, he is doing it with countries, isn't he? I mean, it's uh, it's amazing that none of the Europeans have stood up as much as they have, really. But it shows just how he's it's exasperated. It's the US was short on diplomatic credit anyway because of its insularity and and self-regard. But this administration has really over exceeded the program. We
Oh,
had,
I think that they've really sort of ended the Western alliance, in effect. NATO is effectively over because we're no longer a reliable partner.
and Frank Gomez, he, if he doesn't want to say it personally, he says the bulwark takes a hard line against the administration. Most are conservatives, Republicans like William Crystal. This is true. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we've had John Bolton on our panels quite often because you might disagree with which direction he's shooting in, but he's a straight shooter at least. And
Well, no, I mean, I know I disagreed with them certainly on the Iraq War, but at this stage, I'm welcome all the help we can get.
no, he sometimes, even though I remember he was the one who went to Florida and said, "I am representing the George Bush candidacy, and I'm here to make sure those votes aren't counted when he led his, you know, Brook Brothers mob down to Florida to stop the voting many years ago. If people remember that after all this
Wait, who
time,
said that?
it was John Bolton led the mob that stopped the voting in Florida when they
Uh,
were counting the Chads. Check it out, check it out.
right. No, Roger. I know Roger Stone was down there. I didn't know about
I
Bolton.
think it was John Bolton who did the hatchet work, was the
Yeah.
fronting it up. And I don't know whether he regrets it since, but once again, this is at least he was deeply ideological. It wasn't personal much.
Right. Right.
It's certainly personal. We have, in fact, coming up soon, we have McMaster in a week or in 2 weeks
Oh, good.
is coming for a round table, and he is how can you say he's one of Trump's cast-offs, and that's a sort of sign of character. The fact that so many of your willing acolytes are discarded like used up chewing gum immediately afterwards, and vilified and put on the enemies list because you dared to say what you wanted. And this is very unhealthy. I mean, I'm a pragmatic Democrat. The point about democracy is not that it's ethically superior, but it's pragmatically superior because you actually are more likely to get a truthful and accurate outcome by letting, 100 flowers blossom, as Chairman Mao famously said before he chopped all the heads off. But that's another story. But the principle is that you let contending ideas go, and you work out, you take advice. That seems to be completely missing here. And presumably at the time of Den of Spies, or Den of Throne of Spies, we called it, by the way. I took the liberty of altering it. I thought the Game of Thrones had a sort of appropriateness here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
No,
want
go
to?
on.
We should be winding up soon, unless people want to spring up from the audience and uh, shout calumnification at us for being partisan. Um, I'm not partisan when it comes to the truth. I'm not partisan when it comes to human rights and civil liberties and freedom of the press. I'll support anyone who supports those things, and I'll go against them. I appeared during the Balkan Wars. I appeared on platforms with some very unlikely people. On Taiwan, for example, I've appeared alongside some very, very strange benchmates. But we're agreed on the one principle: self-determination for people and opposition to bullying. So, Craig, do you want to wind up since
Right. Well, what I've tried to do in these books, and we've talked about one from different period, but I've done a total of six on the Republican Party's assault on democracy. And, you can see it going on from 1968 on in the modern era. Again and again, they've been sabotaging. And in each case, you see the erosion of the checks and balances that are supposed to have stopped this. So it's a very scary time. And I don't know. We'll see what happens next. I think it'll get worse before it gets worse.
yes, you said we'll have to wait until the elections, and I think that puts you in the optimistic camp. A, there will be elections, and B, that people will be allowed to vote in.
Well, yeah, no, a lot can happen before then. It's a long
Oh,
time.
this is a sort of an outpost of the bulwark, I suppose, with McMaster, who was a national security advisor whose advice was ignored, and maybe he cared about national security. Must be an invidious position to be national security advisor to a Russian asset, as you say.
Right.
Okay, here we go. That's it. That's it. So there we are, April the 30th. And Lieutenant General or Lieutenant General, sorry, I'm wrong side of the Atlantic, H.R. McMaster. And I think that will be it should be interesting. I don't think he's going to wear his uniform for it. Um, and I hope we're irreverent enough for him because I think he's like many people, he still has vestigial regard for what he thought Donald Trump stood for. We'll find out in 2 weeks' time. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Look forward to hearing from you again. Please get us in touch if you have any other subjects that you'd like us to discuss. And well, thank you yet again. Happy Easter for those who do. Happy Passover for those that have done. Um, and for us heathens, hey, God help us all. So thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thank you, Craig. Bye.
Thank you.